Well, hello and welcome to this edition of the Religion Hurts podcast. My name is Mike Harrison, and I'm just really happy to have you here with me today. I am on the job site once again in my truck, my mobile office, sitting in, enjoying the rain today. Feels like lately all I've been doing is dodging raindrops, but nothing wrong with a little rain. I'm also, as you can tell, just did some painting right after some drywall and some sanding. So I'm a little bit, a little white. You can see my hat. So I didn't just go roll in the dust just to make it look like I was busy. I was actually busy. So I missed last week's episode. Just got a little bit tied up with work and a lot going on, and just wasn't able to get it in, unfortunately. But here we are this week. We got this episode going, and I'm again pumped to have you here. And so without further ado, let's get into this episode. So excuse me, if this is your first time joining us, just quick reminder, the point of the Religion Hurts podcast is just to talk about first of all my testimony. That's what we've been kind of working through here through the last, I believe it is 12 episodes. And just talking about my testimony growing up in an abusive home, and just lots of crazy church stuff from when I was a kid to when I was an adult. My wife and I ended up in a cult for a number of years, and just talking about that experience, what that was like, and what we've gone through with that. And just a reminder that, I'm all about the relationship with Jesus. That's everything. That is the foundation for my life. That's the foundation, I believe, for peace. It's not a solution, it's the solution. And but religion, on the other hand, I believe hurts. Religion is doing things out of habit, out of tradition only, without a relationship. It's basically replacing Jesus with, oh, I pray this way, I read this way, I do things this way. And I really believe it just destroys lives, because it takes out what it was meant to do, which was this relationship. And so that's the purpose basically of this podcast. And we're continuing to grow and see new things and, future and all of that kind of stuff. So I have some interesting news. I am officially going to school, which I don't mean the school of hard work or the school of hard knocks. Been going there for a long time, but no, I am going to become a certified or credentialed pastor through the Assemblies of God, and officially got accepted last week into the AG school, which is the Minnesota School of Ministry, MinSom for short. And I start that, actually my first class is on the 21st of June, and then it's off for the summer, and again starting again in September. And so we have 3 levels with the AG Church. You can get credentialed, which is what I'm going for right now. It takes about a year to do of the school, then almost another year between the exams and process to get that credentialing. And then the next level is licensed pastor, and then the level beyond that is ordained. We'll see. I don't know for sure what I'm going to do regarding that stuff yet, but at this point right now, I'm for sure working towards my credentialing, and then we will see beyond that. And so kind of excited to do some deep diving into some doctrine and understanding, and just grow, hopefully, my faith and my belief system and my doctrinal background. I'm really excited to do that and kind of deep dive into this. It's been really encouraged by a very close friend of mine who's a pastor, somebody that's walked out a lot of stuff with me, that has just really been encouraging about this. It's probably one of the main reasons I first even considered it. And so that we go to an Assemblies of God church right now, which, for those of you that don't know, Assemblies of God is essentially a Pentecostal church. And I'm not 100% sure always how I feel about Pentecostalism and the AG church as a whole. I have moments where I'm unsure of certain things, but I love I say this to my wife all the time. I really view myself often as a deconstructionist. And what I mean by that is I love to tear down what I believe and why I believe it, like deconstruction. Now, that's kind of a taboo word in the Christian culture, because most of the time deconstructionists are literally just tearing down their faith of why they don't believe in God anymore, or why they don't believe in church as an institution, or why all these things. And there's been some really big name evangelists or singers or different people. Like, for example, there was that book that was huge when I think we were just married, but I remember everybody was reading this book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. It was huge in Christian circles, at least around where we were. And the gentleman that wrote that, he's a deconstructionist and essentially left the faith altogether. And there's quite a few people that have followed that suit and done that same thing. And I don't believe in that. So I would say I'm technically more of a reconstructionist. I love taking apart. If somebody says to me, why do you believe in this? You know, for example, let's just say being born again. Why do you believe in that? Where does that come from? I love the process of getting into the Bible and kind of not just taking, well, you know, I've been taught since I was 5 years old, or I remember Sunday school, this is why I believe it, just simply because of the dogma of, I've always just been told that. I love the idea of going, well, okay, let me get into considering why I feel that way, and let's go from there. And so, incidentally, I just love going through. Now that I think most Christians believe in, maybe not, but most Christians that I know believe in being born again and that process and what that looks like. But regardless, I just love the idea of getting into the Bible, reading it for myself, talking to other people that I trust, and just re-examining why I believe certain things. Tear it apart. Get down to the root of why certain things are certain things, and why does the church believe it? Why do I personally, for the most part, why do I believe it? And then going from there. I think I've talked about some of the greatest experiences I've had. For example, in going to Africa, I wasn't sure that after all my experience at in the group, they would talk about healing and the miraculous and all these things all the time. And I just really struggled with believing, can people be healed? And so, healed miraculously. Can that happen for people, or is that just something that's just talked about, or was just in the Old Testament, or is just a nice little story? And I think one of the great experiences with just wanting to understand and stuff, and it became part of my prayer life and seeking it out, and in going on some of the trips to Africa that I went on, and actually seeing some physical healings literally right in front of my eyes, like to the point that I couldn't deny them, has been great in the sense that it's helped me to understand, like, grow. I'm trying to search for the words here. It's just helped to rebuild that part of my faith, or my faith journey, or the faith in me to believe that God can do the miraculous. Now, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to go down discussions of, why does God not heal some people? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? Why do we believe these certain things or those certain things, right? And so I think it's really important to just kind of consider all this stuff. And I just, like I said, I just love the idea of digging into my faith. So I'm really excited to be going to school. All that being said, really excited to be going to school to get this credentialing. I really believe it's something that God wants me to do, and I just love the idea of I'm on a spot that I believe in Pentecostalism to a very large degree. That's probably the most where I would align faith-wise with. No judgment against somebody else for seeing it differently. I love the idea of open conversation. And so I'm excited to go down that road, excited to see what God's got for me with becoming a credentialed pastor and what that looks like, and some of those next steps, which I'll keep you guys up to date with, but just excited to do that. But I'm really excited to get into the eschatology and the homiletics and just a lot of that deeper doctrine stuff. I think I'm just thrilled to get to do it, actually. So I'll as I run into interesting things and things that challenge me and encourage me or whatever, I will make sure to bring them up on this podcast. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts. Anybody that's listening, I love dialogue. I love hearing just different things from you. I have an email address that's going to be coming here shortly for this podcast that I'll start to put on here, just to be able to, if you've got questions or thoughts or prayer requests or anything, that I would love to be able to hear from you more directly. I mean, please feel free to comment on the videos. Those of you that know me in person, stop me anywhere and talk to me anytime you want. And the rest, I should hopefully have that by the next episode, and I will make sure to start including that for email address for contact for anybody that wants to just discuss anything. I just love it. Just truly, thoroughly. I was trying to say thoroughly and truly at the same time. It came out like truly, but thoroughly enjoy that kind of conversation. So, in the most recent episode, I was talking about some of our time in the group, mine and Christy's, and just kind of a lot, I believe, of how the group worked. I want to hit some bigger milestones of some of the major events that happened in the group and what led to us coming out. And then maybe after that, I can deep dive into some certain things a little bit, but I'm going to kind of hit just some of the bigger items here over the last 10-15 minutes of this video. So my wife and I were living in Ontario. We're out there now, and I told everybody how we got there and what we were doing. Well, we're out there for a while. We talked about the different houses and how everybody was situated and stuff. We ended up moving houses a couple times, and some of it was great, some of it was horrible, and none of it was ever really great. Some of it at the moment seemed great, though. And we ended up, eventually, my wife and I were able to rent a house. So the farm rented a property that they operated. The farm, remember, I always call the cult or the group. Essentially, we always called them the farm. And it was Chris and Brenda. It was Laura. Okay, keep up. Laura and Eli, her husband, who she eventually married. Laura did. So it was Laura and Eli. And then it was Leah, Mandy, and Jenna that lived on this property with them. So, and then eventually, Laura and Eli had a kid named Melissa, and she lived there as well. But that was essentially the farm. They all lived on one property. They lived in a combination, usually of two campers, and eventually all in one camper. But they all lived in these two campers together, or on the same property. They had all the horses on this property, large barn, and they did everything for the main part of how the entire group worked was on that farm. And that's just what it was called, was the farm. And anybody that lived there was part of that leadership team. We just called them the farm. So we ended up renting from the same people that actually rented to Chris and Brenda. My wife and I were able to rent a house next door that had some acreage. It was literally next door to Chris and Brenda's, same technical property. Actually, the barn that he rented at and the house that we rented were originally a homestead together, and then it eventually got separated, and so there were two separate properties, and they had been renting out this house to somebody else for a long time, and my wife and I were able to rent it out. And so at this time, I was still working for another construction company, along with a few others of the group, and lots of different people. The money earners for the group all had jobs. And my dad, I believe I had had a lung transplant. I told you guys all that. Had a lung transplant. It was one of the main reasons we moved out there. Well, his body ended up rejecting the lungs, and he got sicker and sicker. I was after my second son was born and before my third son was born. So Ben was born in 2011 and Judah in September of 2012. And my dad passed a little bit before Judah was born. And so his body rejected the lungs, and he ended up first in long-term care at a hospital, and then eventually they moved him to a hospice. And they said to him, you're young enough, we can do a lung transplant again. And he just didn't want to do it. He said that he had always wrestled with guilt at the idea that somebody else had died so that he could have life. I think he had become a little more self-aware as to who he was at that point and kind of the life he led, and he just didn't feel like he deserved a new set of lungs, and nothing we said would change his mind. And so essentially he decided that was it. He just was going to let things take its course. He didn't want to go through a lung transplant again. And so he ended up in the hospice, and he died in the hospice. And that was a big moment for me personally, just with everything, right? But we ended up shortly before that moving to that house, and we were next to the farm, and we ended up kind of running one of these houses. We had different people that moved into the house with us and stayed with us, and that would change from time to time, different things, and I'm just trying to get to the next kind of major event here. And so while we're there, Chris Harrison comes up with an idea that my brother, who's a very, very good carpenter, should start his own construction company. And they called their endurance business, they called it Third Day Endurance, and their business, but their race team, remember I talked about them doing horse racing and stuff. And he said, we need a sponsor for the horse racing. And this is how he always said is, I believe God gave me a prophecy for you, or a word for you, or direction for you, is how he'd always start off everything. Really hard to argue with somebody that you believe is God led when they say God told me. Something that's kind of a pet peeve of mine right now is if somebody says, well, God's telling me, or God gave me this word, I tend to almost go meh. Unless I really know the person and know the heart behind what they're saying, I tend to just kind of write it off. I very much guarantee take it with a grain of salt, but a lot of times when they're saying, God told me to this, no thank you. And so anyways, he encouraged my brother to start a construction company, and that he believed it was going to be really blessed and it would finance the racing team. So my brother started a construction company, and I can maybe get into some of the details more later, but essentially long term is he ended up, my brother was a phenomenal carpenter, and he was good at getting business, and he ended up hiring quite a few of the group right away and got a lot of work. And then eventually he asked me to come work for him and a few others from the group. And in the early days of that construction company, we were busy all the time, and the money was actually great. But what they had set up, and I never really understood this till later, and I'll explain it a little bit down the road. They set up, and it's important because this is how they set up every business from then on to how they would operate, is that Chris took 10% of all the gross of all the jobs and gave it to the group as his sponsorship tithe. Sponsorship/tithe, it's pretty messed up, but that's what he would do. And the problem is, say you sign a construction job for $100,000, which is a pretty decent sized construction job. He would immediately take and cut off 10% of that and give it to the $10,000 to Chris and Brenda and their team. And now he's got $90,000 for this job. But the problem is, it's not actually that often that you make 10% gross profit on a job. It's actually kind of rare in construction. So you might, but it's not, definitely doesn't happen all the time, right? So now you pay for all your materials. For example, say you got a $100,000 job, you pay for all your materials, you pay for all your labor, you pay the subcontractors, electrician, plumber, whatever else. And then, and and then you got to pay yourself, and when that, and your overhead, right? Let's say that's all done. If you calculated everything out right, then you should have a little bit of money left over after that job because you did everything right. You paid all your overhead, you paid everything. But as often happens in construction, even if you built in a pure 10% profit on the top of it, it can get eaten up real quick. Well, if you consistently are making 2, 3, 4% off of every job after paying all expenses, you're going to grow your business, you're going to grow your bank account, right? You're going to make a bunch of money, you're going to clear a bunch of money. But the problem often is that that's hard to do consistently, number one. And then number two, there certainly isn't 10%. And then when you take it right off the top and you just give it away, it ends up being kind of a disaster. And so where does that money come from? Because you got to finish the jobs. Otherwise, if you don't finish a construction job, you don't have work, right? Nobody's going to hire you. So everything becomes cash flow. And it just kind of became a cash flow business. And so his debt load just grew over time, in materials and whatever else. His debt load would just grow. But as long as he had enough cash flow turning in, then essentially you always have enough to pay the bill that's due right now, or, maybe a hair late, but then you can keep going. But you're never technically paying for the job right now, if that makes sense. So if I put, let's say, $50,000 materials from that job on account at a lumber yard, then I don't have to pay for that, for 30 days. Typically, some places will let you get away with 60. Well, now let's say you do that and you get out to that 60-day mark, and, now you've got, technically, this is not at all how I believe to do business, but you technically have a window of 60 days before you have to pay that $50,000 bill. Well, what do you do with that $50,000 then, right? You can pay your employees, you can do all this. Well, if you have another $100,000 job come in, and then you put that material on the account, well, by the time that money comes in, now you've got that 50 grand from that job, you can pay that bill, and essentially you're just pushing that $50,000 thing down the road as long as you keep cash flowing money in. And the danger, of course, is that you're always pushing debt farther. And the right way to do it would be, if by the time I get paid my final payment on a construction job, I should be using that payment to pay my final expense at my vendors. And if I'm doing that and I have a little bit of money left in the bank at the end of that all, I've paid my bills, I've paid my subcontractors, I've paid my vendors, that's the right way to run a business. And that's the way it should be done. But a lot of businesses will do this cash flow thing. And sometimes they'll do it because they're trying to grow the business a little bit and they have regular things. Anyway, I don't need to do a business class. But essentially what my brother was doing was just prolonging the pain all the time. Well, he grew that debt pretty big. And then he got, in the middle of all this, Chris Harrison convinced my best friend, Nathan, and my sister-in-law, Mary, to start a hay business. And so they were basically growing hay and buying hay in Ontario and upper New York State and selling it in Florida. And Nate Wood, started to do all this. And they actually made a rebaling line too, where they would take large round bales, unroll them and repackage them into small squares. Because in Florida, especially during the wintertime, all these people come south with their expensive horses. The horses cannot eat the local hay in Florida. It's not good for them. It's called coastal, and it's really bad for those horses. So they have to eat the hay that they're used to. Well, you can only take so much hay with you. And then these guys rent small farms and areas and different things. And nobody has, for the most part, has tractors and the ability, up north, everybody has equipment and we move large squares or large rounds if we want hay. But down there, everybody uses small squares, and that's just the norm. So you could take, a large round bale of hay, and you could essentially rebale it and take what was worth $60 and turn it into $500-600 because of what they'd end up paying on a small square. So it was a decent business idea. And so Nate built a line to be able to do it. Mary started a store in Florida, and they started this hay store. And then my brother, I was working for him as a project manager. We were building massive apartment buildings at the time, and he got in a fight with a union in a city. And my brother is one of these guys, especially over time, that he would cut off his nose to spite his face. He will not bend. He will not compromise. If he's set his mind to something, that's it. And he got in a fight with the union, and they wanted to turn him, he essentially had a bunch of employees that voted for him to become a union company. And he got so angry about it that he essentially shut the business down. And then because he had all this thousands of dollars in debt, he just, boom, that fast, he was out of business and owed all this money. And all of us were out of jobs. And so I just started doing some carpentry for some other customers at the time, for some of his customers that knew me well and liked my carpentry. And I just did that for a period of time. Then Nate invited me to come work for him. So by this time now, we have got the farm, and we got the main group of people that are still all kind of surrounding the farm up in Ontario. But every winter, the main farm people, which actually Brenda would stay back, but typically Chris, Leah, Amanda, and Jenna would all go south for the wintertime with the horses. 70-year-old Chris Harrison sleeping in a camper all alone with 20-year-old virgins. It's quite a mess. Anyway, that another time, another place we can talk about some of that stuff. But they just be gone for 3-4 months at a time, and they take the horses south and train them, because you can't ride the horses during certain periods of time in Ontario. It's too much snow, and it's the ground gets too hard for that type of training. So they would take them south. And then my sister-in-law, Mary, who was part of the group we talked about, she went south with them one year. They helped her get a store set up, and then Nathan and her. So Nathan did this side, got all the hay, did all this stuff, and then down there, Mary would sell it, and that was the original thing. Well, Mary was not a great business person, and so Chris Harrison convinced Nate that he should move to Florida and help Mary do the store year-round. And then because I was out of a job, Nate asked me if I would start doing the hay part up in Ontario. So I did that for a period of time, and then I would actually go back and forth for a while. And eventually, Nate, who is a very good business mind, realized that we needed to get hay from other parts of the country. So he got me to come down, got me trained to get my CDL. He had bought a semi-truck, and then he started sending me out on the road to go be a buyer. So I would go all over the place out west, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and I'd go look at hay, buy hay, load hay, and take hay back to. So I'd usually be gone 7 to 10 days at a shot, then home for 3 or 4, and then gone out again, and I just do that as a loop, and started trucking doing that. So now my brother's lost his business altogether. He eventually comes to work for Nate, and they would do that, right? So the construction companies no more. Well, eventually all these people kind of filtered in there. And what I should say is one of the first things that started to happen when they started to do this cash flow thing and they started to run short on money, they didn't have enough cash flow to come in to match these bills that were growing, is they'd start to go to the main people in the group, and rather than go out into the world and have a job and then take, a big chunk of that money and give it to the group, instead, because we're all devoted and we just wouldn't get near as much wages. And we just kind of was sold as like, we're all buying it, we're all doing this together. And truthfully, the farm people weren't getting paid. And so if they're not getting paid and they're working hard for this gift to Israel and this thing that God's doing, then why should we be getting paid? No, we get our basics covered, typically, cell phones and stuff, especially if you needed it. If you were on the business side and you needed a cell phone, like I always had a cell phone because I was traveling all over the country. They always made sure that those were paid and things like that, and food typically. But oftentimes it was big droughts of things in between. And so, but we did that hay company, and then I'm going to try to wrap this up here now. But the next big move was Nate and Chris Harrison got into a huge fight. And I didn't know, I was out on the road when this happened. And when I came back, we had 2 trucks at that time. Nate got in one truck and just left. And Mary was sitting there holding their debts and all their different things. And Chris Harrison asked me to take over Nate's spot in the hay business. And I think there's a whole nother story I'm going to get into the next time. But essentially, most of the group now is working for the hay business, trying to support what the racing is doing, essentially what the group is doing, and all the purpose, the gift to Israel, the end times, all of it, right? The gift to Israel was going to trigger an end time move, all these different things. And I'll get into some more of that deal. There's so much to cover. And I'll get into some of that on the next episode. And anyways, I appreciate you joining me. I'm just really blessed for you just taking any time at all to hear what I'm talking about. Would love to hear from you. I'll get that email out soon. Otherwise, please feel free to comment on this video, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. God bless.